Hi, my name is Daniel Clay, and I want to welcome you to the International Association of Woodcarvers.
All right, guys, good afternoon and welcome to the International Association of Woodcarvers. Today is September the 3rd, a little bit after 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I want to thank you all for joining us on this Saturday afternoon, taking time out of your Saturday to come in and hear about some of the things that are coming up as far as wood carving goes. Today on our meeting, we have a special guest coming to us from Knoxville, Tennessee. We've got Mr. Daniel Clay that's coming to us. He's going to be talking a little bit about chip carving. He's got a new book that's coming out that is available that he'll be talking about. He's going to go through some projects and some other offerings that he has. But before we get started with that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we've got going on. After today, we're back into our monthly meetings where we're going to be meeting every Saturday except for a couple of Saturdays. I was going to tell you a little bit about that. Next week, we're going to have Jack Loring on September the 10th. He is Cousin Jack Carves on YouTube, and he's going to be coming on doing a demonstration. On the 17th, we're going to be off, so we're not going to have a meeting that Saturday because we're going to be preparing to travel out to Colorado to the Carving the Rockies show that the CCA is putting on. We're going to be broadcasting live there on the 24th, so we won't have a meeting on the 17th, so make note of that. After the 24th, then we're going to go into October. Chris Gardia is going to be on October the 1st. Nikki Reese is going to be doing a painting demo on October the 15th. So you'll notice there we've skipped the 8th. If we get somebody to fill in that date, then I'll let you all know as the meetings come on, and we'll also go ahead and advertise that on social media. On October the 22nd, Bob Hershey, who's on with us today, is going to be coming on and doing a demonstration and talking about his class that's coming up. And then October the 29th, Rod Gatlin from the Charlotte Woodcarvers is going to be coming on. And he's going to be talking about the Charlotte show and doing a demonstration as well. And then just this week, we had Ryan Olson reach out, and he's going to be coming on with us on November the 19th. And he'll be doing a demonstration and talking about an upcoming class that he has. So look forward to all of those dates. Some of the things that I wanted to let you know that's available in the public. Some of the shows that are coming up on September the 17th and 18th. Big Stone Gap in Big Stone Gap, Virginia has a carve-in. If you're in the area and available, make sure you go out and check that out. Randy Landon contacted me this past week, and he has some spots available for his caricature woodcarving seminar called the Knot Hole Woodcarving Studio. Again, it's available on September 16th through the 18th. So if you're available for that, reach out to Randy Landon. Again, September the 24th and 25th is the Carving the Rockies show. I was advised this week that Heineke Wood Products isn't going to be able to be there. So Randy from Moore Rough Outs is going to be available. He's going to be taking pre-orders. So if you're interested in ordering basswood and picking it up at the show, contact Randy at Moore Rough Outs. You can find him online, and they'll get orders together, and you can pick them up there at the show so that you don't have to pay shipping. And then October 1st and 2nd, the Smoky Mountain Woodcarvers Festival is going to be down in Sevierville, Tennessee. Again, that's October 1st and 2nd. And Wednesday through Friday before that show, they're going to be doing a chip carving class there. So if anybody is interested in that, you can look them up. I think we've done some advertising for them on our Facebook page. So you can go out and check that out. And then in March of next year, the Ozark Woodcarving Seminar is going to be in Springfield, Missouri. That's March the 13th through the 17th. So check that out as well. Having said all of that, I'll talk about the workshops that's coming up at the end of the meeting. I want to go ahead and turn it over to Daniel Clay. Again, Daniel's coming to us from Knoxville, Tennessee. He's been on with us before, and he's going to talk a little bit about chip carving, his new book, and some of the projects and things that he has going on. So Daniel, I appreciate you coming on today, and I'll go ahead and turn this over to you.
All right. Thanks, Blake. And thanks for joining us here, everybody. Just to tell you a little bit about myself before I get started talking about chip carving. I started woodworking in around 2005. I did an apprenticeship at a boat building school in Maine, on the coast of Maine, about an hour and 20 minutes north of Portland, Maine. called the Carpenter's Boat Shop. It was a 1-year apprenticeship program that I'd heard about. I was living in Atlanta at the time, and I'd heard about it through friends, and it sounded pretty interesting. So I applied and got the apprenticeship, and went up to Maine and lived there for a year and learned wooden skiff and dinghy building and some boat restoration. And at the same time, there was an instructor there who was doing a lot of green woodworking, carving spoons, carving bowls, some furniture as well. He was working his way through a bunch of Drew Langsner's Appalachian ladderback chairs out of the Country Workshops book. And so I got really into things that were not boats, and ended up being more interested in woodworking at large than just boats in particular. So after that, I moved back to the South. I worked for a few different people doing woodworking jobs, woodworking related jobs. I worked for a traditional timber framer for a little while. I worked on kitchen remodeling and building kitchen cabinets. And woodworking stayed, after those jobs, woodworking stayed more or less a hobby for a while. And then in 2015, I decided to go full time with woodworking. I was working at a job where I sat behind a computer a lot, and I just decided I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. So decided to take my hobby into a full-time pursuit. And along the way, I had started teaching myself wood chip carving. And I started learning by going through one of Wayne Barton's books, and many of you will probably be familiar with Wayne Barton. He's probably, I would guess, probably one of the more well-known, maybe the most well-known chip carver and instructors and authors in the country and in the world. And so I taught myself out of one of his books. I went through a couple more of his books, just carving different projects. And because of, this is just kind of my personality, but I kind of go down rabbit trails when I get into something. And so I started looking at older books, what exists, what instructional material was out there before Wayne Barton started writing in the late 70s, early 80s. And then going further and further back, and looking at historical examples of it. I still do a lot of that. I do a lot of digging on museum websites and folk art auction websites. And there are a lot of people around the world who are enthusiasts about chip carving and other forms of decorative surface carving. And so there's a lot of information out there if you look for it. And there's a lot of inspiration out there if you look for it, especially in museums and art auction websites. You'll just find a lot of examples of folk art, and you begin to see how old and how widespread chip carving is. And so the more I got into it, I eventually started teaching classes and traveling around the country a little bit and teaching classes. And that kind of snowballed, and someone at Fine Woodworking eventually reached out. Fine Woodworking magazine reached out and asked me to write an article about how to get started chip carving. So that article came out in, I think it was in 2019, late 2019. And that eventually led to the folks at Blue Hills Press getting in touch and asking if I wanted to write a book about how to chip carve. So that's how I ended up writing the book, and it was just published in August. So it's been out for about a month now. And so now I am, selling books and talking to people about the books, and starting to book classes again. When I was in the middle of writing the book, I really didn't teach that much. It also just happened that, writing the book and carving and photographing all the projects for the book happened like right in the middle of the pandemic. So it was a little bit of a blessing in disguise because at the first part of that, I was at home like everyone else, so I had a lot of time to work through the projects in the book and the writing and the photography. And now that things are sort of getting more or less back to normal, I'm booking classes again. And I have a class in Knoxville coming up here. We're doing at the workshop that I work out of, we're doing a 3-week sort of mini course in chip carving. So we'll be meeting every Wednesday night starting September 14th for 3 weeks in a row. And then a full day class on October 1st. And then I'm booking things for next year. So that's sort of getting back into, I'm getting all that rolling again, teaching in person. And lately I have been talking to people that record podcasts and host Zoom meetings like this. And so that's a little bit of history of about how I got here and how I ended up writing a book about chip carving. And so one of the things that I'm just going to switch up the camera a little bit here. One of the things that people want to know is what is in the book. And zoom out a little bit. So one of the big goals for me in writing a book about chip carving is trying not to reproduce somebody else's book. And there's a lot of books about chip carving out there. There's some good ones. And it was just important to me not to just, put something that was already out there out under my name. So a lot of the technical material is the same because good technique doesn't really change, so you have to tell people how to actually accomplish the work. And so a lot of that material is similar to what you might find in other books. But beyond that, I really tried hard to put my own spin on things and write about it in the way that I teach about it. And then also encourage people to use it creatively in a unique way. So just to give you a little breakdown of the book here, before I show you some chip carving techniques. The first chapter is getting started, tools and materials, which is exactly what it sounds like, what you'll need to get going. And then from there it goes into technique and the basic knife grips that you would need to chip carve. And I'll talk a little bit more about those a little bit later. And this chapter also covers sort of basic safety and ergonomics, how to use your body mechanics to get the the best use of the knife. And then from there, I go through a couple practice boards, and practice boards are basically just these simple shapes. We start simple with these little triangular chips, and it gets a little bit more complex. Introduce some curves, introduce some different combinations of multiple chips together, and then some common motifs like the fan motif that you see a lot in traditional chip carving patterns, and then into these sort of more complex border patterns, which use a lot of the stuff you cover in the earlier part of the practice board. So chips that are both curved and have straight lines and are adjacent to one another. And so from there, we get into projects. And I have about 10 projects in the chapter called First Projects. And the point of each chapter in the book is to sort of build on what you learned in the previous chapter, right? So after you go through the practice board, the projects take you through using all the shapes, the chip shapes that you learned in the practice boards and applying them to these small decorative projects. So some little panels here, just small decorative ornamental things. And they get a little more complex. Go through a little bit of how to lay things out by hand with a compass. And then from the beginner projects chapter, things get even a little bit more complex. And I talk about compound chip shapes, which really means just taking, using these 2 and 3 sided chip shapes to make more complex shapes, like a star. In that same chapter, I go through lettering. Because lettering is essentially all compound shapes. It's all V-groove lines. So if you were, using a V gouge to carve letters, you're doing the same thing with a knife. You're just making 2 cuts with a knife, whereas with a V-groove chisel or gouge, you would, make 1 cut. But so I go through lettering, and then things get a little bit more interesting with freehand carving. So with freehand carving, the goal is really to sort of take the training wheels off in terms of using the knife the way you would a writing utensil or a marking utensil. And so instead of using a pattern that's printed and you're following the lines, you're really just using the knife the way you would a pen or a pencil and directing it with your eye. And there's the reason that I focus on freehand carving a lot is, well, one, it's the pure eye-hand coordination of it. And it's also traditional. If you look at a lot of old folk carvings, you can just tell that they were not carved to a printed pattern or a drawn pattern. It was carved, in place out of the carver's mind, right? So I think it's an important thing to spend some time on. I don't know of any other books that really focus on freehand carving the way I have. But I think it's if there's some other teachers out there that do focus on freehand carving. Yogi Sundquist, if you're familiar with his Sloyd chip carving, he does a lot of freehand chip carving. It's a little bit like running with weights on. Also, if you spend some time just with a knife and a blank piece of wood and treating the knife like a marking tool and carving, basically doodling and not relying on printed lines. And I'm just like I said, doodling here. I'm just making this up. If you spend some time doing that, when you go back to carving printed patterns, it's going to be a lot easier. Like your hand is just, your hand and your eye work together in a way after you spend some time freehand carving that, it just makes following a printed line all that much easier. So that's one of the reasons I focus so much on freehand carving. And the next chapter builds on all of the stuff that was in the first part of the book. So this is kind of the final chapter of projects, and I call it traditional chip carving because I think it's not that the patterns, the patterns themselves are traditional, and you will see these, these patterns in a lot of traditional folk carving. But what I mean by traditional chip carving is really the method. So using the standard vocabulary of chip shapes, 2 and 3 sided chips, V-groove lines, and using those in a way that allows you to sort of put together patterns on the fly yourself. So the point of this chapter is to basically start with a blank board. Let me zoom in here a little bit. Let's see. So I start with a blank board and with really no idea of where I'm going to end up, or a vague idea. And I start doing what traditional chip carvers have always done. You fill in the board with common ornamental motifs, like the daisy wheel. So that's a common one that you see in a lot of traditional chip carving. And you don't necessarily have to have a master plan in mind when you start out on a pattern. You can sort of build it as you go, and that's what this chapter is all about. Just sort of starting with a blank board, and for instance, my path here was sort of my decision making here was like, I'm going to start with this board, and I'm going to put 3 big rosettes. So I'll put the first one in the center, I'll flank it with 2 others, and then once I've got those drawn out, I'll carve in the outlines. And then once the outlines are carved in, I have some decisions to make. How can I fill out what's inside the outlines? So a common motif, just for example, the diamond in this this petal shape is a very common traditional way to fill out that particular part of the daisy wheel. But I could have done it in a number of ways, right? So there's a little bit of choose your own adventure that I encourage people to do in this chapter. And the more chips you add, the more it begins to look like what we think of when we say traditional chip carving. So that's
Hey,
kind of
Daniel,
yeah,
just a couple questions that are in the chat real quick.
yeah.
One, is there somewhere that they can get those the beginner boards that you showed there at the beginning? Do you have those printed available, or is that something that they can go out and buy somewhere?
Oh, the practice boards.
Yes.
Yeah. So I sell the practice boards on my website. You can also, if you buy a copy, let me see if I can find it here. Where is it? Hang on just a second. So one of the things I go through in the book is how to transfer patterns. And this is when you buy a copy of the book from me, I also send out a packet of these patterns, and these are printed. You can also print these at home. They're printed on a laser printer, not an inkjet printer. There's a big difference between those 2 machines, because a laser printer uses toner. A Xerox machine or photocopier also uses toner instead of ink. And what the advantage of that is that you can then place this face down on a piece of wood and iron the back of it, and it will transfer to the wood. So if you buy a copy of the book from me, it comes with a package of toner patterns that are all the patterns that are in the book. You can also buy practice boards off my website. They come in these sets, and the set matches the set that I carved through in the book. I also sell chip. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead and give a pitch. Where can they get the book from?
Oh yeah. The best place to get it is danielclaywoodworking.com.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, and depending on where you are in the world, I only ship in the US. So if you're overseas, I don't know if anyone here is, you can go through Amazon. That's probably your best bet. Apparently, it takes a while for it to trickle out into the global market, but I do think they're shipping to Europe and possibly Australia now. I'm not sure. So, but yeah, if you're in the United States, order it for me, and for whatever it's worth, I do sign every copy. I don't know if anybody cares about that, but I do. And then you also get this package of toner prints, and I usually throw in a couple other little goodies with the books I send out, just as thank yous. So, yeah, so I guess I should talk about maybe we'll just go through like sort of basic chip carving technique. That sound good?
Yeah, that's good.
All right, so let me zoom in here. So I'm just gonna tilt this down a little bit. So the knife that you use for Swiss style chip carving, let me get it right here. It's got a specific geometry and design. You'll see that the blade is pretty short and the edge is perfectly straight, and the back of the blade sort of arches down, and the point is needle sharp. The edge of the blade is also, you'll see, like at a slight angle to the handle, and that gives you a little bit of leverage. And with Swiss, so the style of chip carving that I teach is typically called Swiss style chip carving, and that refers to it's the technical method, not necessarily the stylistic aesthetic of carvings that come from Switzerland, but it's really the combination of using a knife that's designed like this and the grips you use. So Swiss style chip carving use two basic knife grips. There's first position, and I'll show you these quick, and then I'll go back through and explain the details. So there's first position, which looks like this, and you'll see that my thumb is making contact with the board. And you'll also see that if you can see in the little picture up in the left-hand part of the screen, the knife is at about a 60-degree angle to the board. And so when I make a cut in first position, I'm going to press down on my thumb, and my elbow is going to go up. So that turns my thumb into a fulcrum and my arm into a lever, and all that work force gets translated down into the tip of the knife, and I can make a nice, powerful, controlled plunge cut into the wood. And again, that cut is made at an angle. See if you can see that, right? So it's not straight up and down. So that's my first position knife grip. Now, for my second position, I'm gonna mirror that grip. I'm gonna rotate the knife in my grip, and now my thumb is on the back of the knife. I'm gonna rotate the board around, and I'm gonna make a similar cut, a plunge cut, that mirrors that first cut. But now my knuckle is on the surface of the board, and my knuckle becomes the fulcrum. Again, I'm lifting my elbow and make a nice, powerful, controlled plunge cut. And again, you can see that the knife has gone in at about, it's a little less than a 60 on that one. But the angle isn't that important. You do want to develop some consistency with the angles, but somewhere between 45, 65 degrees. Okay, so now I've got these two cuts that mirror one another. So this one was made at an angle like that. This one was made at an angle like that. And to relieve that chip, I'm going to go back to my first position cut, and I'm going to make another cut across the bottom here. And if all my cuts line up and intersect one another, that chip will pop out. And if there's any waste left over, if I need to clean anything up, I can just go back and make one or more of those cuts again. So with our starting at our practice board, so these little 3-corner chips or triangular chips, that's why they're first in the practice board, because learning how to carve one of these little triangular chips will teach you both of those cuts, and it sort of encapsulates the entire technique of chip carving. You learn to get the first and second position knife grips down. You learn to make your cuts, mirror one another at angles between those two different grips. And it just gives you, they're small enough that in basswood, at least, you can make these nice little plunge cuts. And if your chip pops out, you've done it right. If your chip doesn't pop out, something went wrong. So that's where it, that's why the practice boards have the same chip shapes over and over again so that you can practice. It's a little bit like learning to write in cursive, which no one does now anymore, so I hear. But if you remember learning to write in cursive in school, you would write the same letter over and over and over and over and over again, and you go back and you compare your letters to the printed version of the letter, what it should look like. So that's kind of the idea here, is with the practice boards, you get a chance to practice these simple cuts and carve these shapes that will eventually go to make up much more complex parts of much more complex patterns. So let's talk about knife grips in a little more detail. So first position grip, get this out of the way for a second. To get a good first position grip, this is what I usually tell people to do. Now I'm right-handed, so for the lefties out there, apologies. A lot of the instruction in chip carving for lefties, you're just gonna have to sort of flip it in your brain. But I imagine most lefties have been doing that most of their lives, so won't be that big of a deal. But so for a first position knife grip, I've got my carving hand. I hold it out in front of me, palm up, and I place the knife across the joint of my fingers where my fingers join the palm of my hand. And I'm just gonna curl my fingers around, and then the side of my thumb gets planted on the handle there. Now I'm gonna look down, and I'll be a little bit out of focus here, but I'm gonna look down the knife and sort of rotate it a little bit in my grip until the blade of the knife and the bed of my thumbnail are about parallel. You can see what I'm saying, right? So that is my first position grip. And the important thing about this grip is that once you get it, your hand stays locked like that. And that's important because it gives you a couple things. First of all, if the knife is never moving in relation to your thumb, it can't cut your thumb, right? So like if I were peeling potatoes like this, like the blade of the knife is moving and my thumb is staying still. If I slip, I could cut my thumb. With Swiss style chip carving, the knife grips mean that your hand and the knife are locked in position, so they work as a unit. And because of that, it's really very, very hard to cut yourself. It's very safe. I basically never cut myself. I've cut myself carving spoons and bowls way more than I ever have chip carving. I don't really ever have any accidents or casualties in classes that I teach. And people always get superstitious whenever I say that. They say I should knock wood because I'm just jinxing myself or something. But if you use the grips properly, it's very safe. So I've got my first position knife grip. Again, I'm planting my thumb, and the knife is at an angle to the board. Okay, so for the second position knife grip, all I'm gonna do is rotate the knife in my grip. And now, instead of being parallel, the blade of the knife is perpendicular to my thumbnail. And so I can use that grip to make a cut that's away from me, and I pivot, or I keep my knuckles planted on the board. Whereas in the first position grip, I'm keeping my thumb planted on the board. It gives you a lot of leverage and a lot of control, and also that contact with the wood with either your knuckles or your thumb. That gives you some tactile feedback so that you don't, if your hand were to slip, it's easy to stop yourself. If your hand slips, your thumb or your knuckle sort of acts like a brake. Whereas if my hand was just floating in space and the knife, skids out of the wood or something, not only do I not have as much control or leverage without that contact, but I also don't have as much stopping power, right? So it's just much safer to keep your hand in contact with the surface of the wood at all times. So let's see. So we got first position grip, that second position grip, and then back to first position grip to get that chip to pop out. So we've mostly done, let's see, those are plunge cuts. The first two cuts are plunge cuts. This third cut, the relief cut, I am actually sort of pulling my entire hand with the knife as I lower the blade into the wood. So we really have three separate techniques here, just learning to carve this one simple little chip. You've got your first position cut, second position cut, and then back to first position cut, but instead of a plunge, it's more of a draw. I'm drawing the knife across the baseline of that chip. And that comes in handy when you get into chips that are longer, require longer cuts, like these large triangles. So I'll start, move down here. So you'll see that I'm actually pulling the knife with my hand. So my hand is locked. I'm not going like this. I'm not doing that. I'm sinking the knife into the wood and I'm pulling my entire hand to make that cut. And I'll do the same thing on the opposite side. And then I'll do the same thing across the base of that chip. If the chip doesn't pop out, like this one is, well, it's just about out. There's a little bit of waste in the bottom, so I'll just make those cuts again to get out all that waste until I'm left with something nice and clean. So let me see if I can zoom in there for you. Yeah, there we go. Those pulling cuts in first position also come in handy when you get into two-corner chips. So when I say 2 and 3 corner chips, I use 3-corner chip sort of interchangeably with triangular chip, but the reason it makes sense to call them a 3-corner chip, take these shapes, for example. These are not exactly triangles. I guess they're a kind of triangle, but what they are is a 3-corner chip. And then what we have here is 2-corner chips. So for these 2-corner chips, again, I'll be carving in first position, and I'm going to pull my entire hand through the cut. And then I'll come around from the other side, make a cut in the opposite direction, and pull my entire hand through the cut. And again, if anything's still attached, you just make the cut again. And if your cuts line up and they intersect one another cleanly, these chips pop out, nice and neat. So that's really the purpose of the practice boards, is just getting a lot of practice, making your cuts match, getting your cuts to intersect one another, learning how to troubleshoot, getting familiar with the grips, and getting the muscle memory down. Let's see. Should probably talk about sharpening, because the sharpening process for chip carving knives is a little peculiar as well.
Hey, Daniel, before you get into that, when you're working
Yeah,
on a piece that has repeating cuts, do you work all the way across one direction and then turn it around and work it back?
you can. Yeah, that's that's a, that's one thing you can do to speed things up. So I call that batch cutting. So I would make, if I were gonna carve this border, since all these chips are in the same orientation to the grain, it's easy for me to make all of these first cuts in one pass or one batch, and then I'll turn it and make all of my second position cuts. Sometimes I use a separate board here on the edge if I'm getting close and I need something to rest my knuckles on. And then I'll come back and I can relieve all these cuts in one pass. Actually, before I move on to sharpening, while we're looking at this, can talk about troubleshooting a little bit. If you're finding that the chip, let me see. I'm gonna see if I can make a mistake here. So if you find that your chip, you make your cuts and your chip doesn't pop out. So the reason that is not going anywhere is because those three cuts don't intersect. I haven't severed all the fibers that hold that chip into place. So the thing to do in that case is simply make those cuts again. And I'm just gonna put my knife back in the cut that I've already made, just go a little bit deeper and follow my progression of cuts around again, and just make those cuts again until the chip pops out. What you don't want to do is pry the chip out, because you will break the tip off of the knife. One of the characteristics of a good chip carving knife is that it's very thin. So this knife is probably, I don't know, at the thickest it's about 3/32 of an inch thick. Maybe, I don't know what that is in metric. I don't know how many folks are here are from countries that use a metric system. It's about a millimeter thick at the thickest. Down at the tip, the very tip of this knife, you're talking about, like, I don't know, a 32nd of an inch thick. So very thin, which allows you to if it's sharp, slide it into the wood really easily. It makes carving clean details possible. But if you pry with the tip of that knife, you're going to break it off. So I always tell my students in classes, we call it chip carving, not chip digging. So don't go digging to get your chips out, because you will break your knife. So other things to look for if you're just getting started. If you find that, let me see if I can do another common mistake here. Oh, get back on camera. Okay, I hope you'll be able to see this. If you can see this this chip right here, see how the center of that little chip pocket is way off to one side? That is because my angles on those cuts don't match. So what I did was I made this cut way too steep, and then this one was relatively shallow, and then this one was also shallow. So that puts the center of that chip pocket off to one side. So as you're going through the practice board, you can use that to sort of diagnose whether or not your angles are matching up from, when you switch between first position and second position. So the same thing, in the opposite way would be is if my first cut was a shallow angle of cut, and then my second cut was too steep, I'll have the opposite problem where the center of that triangular chip pocket is off to one side. But if they match up right, you know, you should have, the center should be right in the center. And as far as angles, the reason you want to stay between about 45 and 65 degrees is that part of the thing that gives chip carving its look is the shadows cast, right? So let me grab something here. So back up a tiny bit, zoom out. So I'm in the classroom here at the shop that I work out of, and these shadows aren't great in here because of the overhead fluorescence. But part of what gives chip carving its characteristic look is shadows. And if your angle of cut is too shallow, your chips are not going to be deep enough to cast good shadows. If your angle of cut is too steep, not only are you going to have a hard time getting your chips out because the knife is going to have to travel further into the depth of the wood in order for those cuts to intersect, but it makes your carving look, I don't have a good example here, but it makes your carving just look a little bit too shadowy, too brutal. You can't see the bottom of the chip. You can't, you don't get this nice clean line at the bottom of the chip where the facets of the chip pockets intersect. So you want to stay in that sweet spot of about 45 to 65, somewhere in there. So let's see. Sharpening a knife, certainly most everyone here is probably familiar with that, because would you say that everyone here is mostly does caricature carving, or what kind of work do we have in
Yeah,
the
the
group here?
majority, I think the majority, Daniel, are caricature carvers, but we do have a variety here.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think that there's probably, just in terms of understanding of grain direction and how that functions in your decision making when you're carving and what cuts to make first. There's probably a lot of overlap between caricature carving and chip carving, because y'all are mostly carving basswood, I would assume.
Yeah, probably 90%. Yep.
Yeah. So wood is wood, and it's gonna do whatever you tell it to do with the knife. So I would imagine, I haven't done any caricature carving, but in chip carving, you're gonna want to obey the grain direction, and it sort of tells you what to do first and what to do when. So that's similar, and the principles of sharpening are similar as well, but the geometry of a chip carving knife is maybe a little bit different from what y'all would carve with. Are y'all using like a flat plane carving blades mostly, or sloyd knives, or does it differ?
Really, it's a variety, I guess, but most have like a flat bevel.
Okay.
So there's a lot of similarities, I think, between that and the blade that you have there.
Yeah. So let me see if I can find one of the diagrams in here. Just to let's see. So there it is. Okay, so the cross section of a chip carving knife, this is what I'm going for when I sharpen a chip carving knife. It's a very gradual convex slope down from the sides of the blade to the edge. So it's not a perfect flat grind, because you do want to maintain a little bit of strength down here, towards the edge, especially at the tip of the knife. And it's not a hard bevel, and it's not an asymmetrical bevel. I try to keep the knife symmetrical, but it's a pretty gradual slope down to the edge. And so the way that I do that is, so I don't have all my personal sharpening stuff here, but this is like this is what comes with one of my kits. I've recently switched over. I used to do polished marble tiles as a sharpening surface, and I've recently been playing around with these acrylic pieces of acrylic, which are nice and flat. They're about 3/8 of an inch thick, and they work great. It's the exact same size as the tiles I used to use. And this is 3M peel and stick abrasive. It's I think aluminum oxide is the abrasive particle they use. And so the process is basically, what I do is I work the sides of the knife first, and then I establish the bevel. Let me see if I can get a good shot down this way. Show you what I do. So I'd work the sides of the knife first. I'm not going to do it on this knife because this one's already pretty sharp. Well, I can do it on one of the finer grits and just give it a tune up here. So the grits I use for the final polishing, I think are 5 micron and
Hey, Daniel, can you pull in this frame a little bit? Oh, there you go. That's perfect.
yeah. I don't want to adjust my overhead camera because it'll never stop shaking if I do that. So, but basically, when I'm carving a knife or when I'm sharpening a knife, I work the sides first, and then I will tilt the knife up just a little bit, about the thickness of a dime, so I could slide, maybe slide a dime or a penny under the back of that knife, and then I'll do the bevel. And then I do a combination where I start flat, and as I'm stroking the knife back and forth, I rock the knife up. I don't know if you can hear that. You might not be able to hear it. But I'm simultaneously going back and forth and tilting the knife up and down just a tiny bit. And the reason I do that is to get that round, whatever hard bevel I've established, I want to round that bevel over. But I do that through a number of grits. I'll start at like probably the same way y'all sharpen your knives. I start at a coarse, and then I go down through fine, extra fine, and then I end up on these 2 polishing grits. I think this one is maybe a 5 micron, and I believe this is 3 micron. And I just want to get a pretty good mirror polish on both sides. And once you get the knife, sharpened through the, you get a knife from a factory like File or whatever, it's going to have machine marks on it. It's going to have a machined bevel, but it's not actually sharp enough to do good work with. So you really have to sharpen every knife that comes from a factory. There are some exceptions to that. I mean, Flex Cut gets really nice edges on their tools, and they're nice and polished. But the reason I've never used, and I don't recommend Flex Cut knives for chip carving, is because the point of the knives is really inconsistent. Like, you'll get a Flex Cut knife, and I've just found that sometimes the tip of the knife is rounded or something. And I don't know if anyone here has tried to regrind a Flex Cut knife, but I've never had much luck getting them to retain an edge after regrinding them. So the file knives seem to work fine, and the Clotesly knives from Switzerland also work great. So once I take it through these 2 grits, these 2 final polishing grits, I will strop it. And again, this works just about like any other strop or tool for sharpening any other tool. I've recently switched to green honing compound because that's what I send out with my chip carving kits. I don't think it really matters as long as your honing compound is, a sub-micron honing compound, something that's going to give you a good polish. This is a chrome oxide. I think it's like the average particle size is maybe 0.5 microns, something like that. I used to use the FlexPet strop compound, and it works great. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to send out FlexPet compound with my kits because I'm not a FlexPet distributor or a retailer or anything. So with the stropping, the thing that I tell students to watch out for is they will tend to want to flip the knife through the stroke at the end, and I think it's important to lift up so that at the end of that stroke you're not turning the edge of the knife through the strop. Not only are you going to destroy your strop, but you're also just going to round over the edge on your knife.
Hey, Daniel, while you're doing that, do you have a source for the 3M pill and stick abrasive adhesive that you were using?
Yeah, I get it from Tools for Working Wood. It comes in 8.5 by 11 sheets, and that's what goes for the time being, at least. That's what goes into my carving kits. So I'll send a little sharpening flat like this with the 4 grits. I think they're 40 microns, 15 microns. I want to say 5 and 3. Maybe it's 9 and 3. And I also include another set of these 4 grits. But you can get it at Tools for Working Wood. It's not, I wouldn't say it's cheap, but it's not going to break the bank. I guess it depends on how much sharpening you do. If you're going to, also once you go through, you take a brand new knife through the initial process of taking off the machine marks on the sides, establishing your bevel, getting a nice wire burr, rounding over that bevel, and doing that on both sides through all the grits. Unless you damage or severely dull the edge of your knife, you're not going to have to go back through the heavier grits. And, I feel like I'm probably repeating a bunch of stuff that y'all already know because you're already wood carvers. So apologies if that's boring because you already deal with that stuff on your own anyway. So in your own carving. But anyway, that's how I sharpen my knives, and currently I do that by hand with all the knives that come with my kits as well, because people who buy the kits, I want them to be using the exact same stuff that I use, so that if they have any problems, I know how to tell them what to do. It's like I know that they're using the wood that I get from my lumber yard, and they're using the knife that I sharpened. And so I kind of, just that one-to-one relationship between the tools and materials makes a lot of sense to me in terms of like teaching people who are buying stuff from me and learning from afar. So what else can I show y'all? I want to know what people want to hear.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and open the floor up. Yeah, go ahead and open the floor up to the audience. Does anybody have any questions for Daniel today? Go ahead and feel free to unmute if you'd like. While we're waiting there, Daniel, I have a copy of the book. It's about 200 pages. So when you buy this book from Daniel, don't feel like you're just going to get 10 or 12 pages. It's a very thorough book. There's a lot of information there. Reach out to him and get a copy of it if you're interested in chip carving. You'll be glad that you did. And inside the book, do you have those resources as far as where they can get the knives and stuff?
Sorry, hang on. Sorry, I can't talk. Okay. I'm on a Zoom call. Sorry.
In the book, do you have the resources as far as where they can get the knives and the materials and stuff?
Let's see. I think that well, my website is not listed in the book, but my Instagram page is, so you can find me on Instagram. You can find all the links through Instagram. And but danielclaywoodworking.com is the place to go if you're looking for books, kits, practice boards. I'm hoping to do some projects from the book as well, some like sort of project kits of pre-printed projects. So all that stuff is in the works. Right now, I'm mostly just selling the book and the kits and practice boards. Yeah.
Question for you, Daniel.
Yeah.
You know, what you're showing us is pretty much practice boards,
Yeah.
but the ultimate goal is to put that onto a project,
Yeah.
like a stool or whatever. Do you have examples with you of anything you could show us that you've done in the way of
I
project?
do. Yeah, I have a couple. Let's see here. Let me zoom out a little bit. I brought some of the stuff that is in the book. So in the final chapter, actually, I think this one didn't actually make it into the book, but it's a similar kind of project. In the final chapter, I go through, in the book, I call them mini mangle boards. And a mangle board, if you're not familiar with it, is, a mangle board is the way that people used to iron linen. They used to press linen. They would have a rolling pin, and you know, boil your linen or scrub your linen, and then wrap the linen around a pin and put it on a table, and then you'd have a board with a handle and run it back and forth to press the linen. And over the years, those would be, you know, decorated, and they eventually became like a marriage gift, a betrothal gift. And eventually, by about the 19th century, you stop seeing mangle boards with handles at all, and they're just purely decorative boards, still called a mangle board. So this was, you know, there are 3 mangle boards that I go through in the final chapter of the book. And so I call these mini mangle boards because they're a little bit smaller than you know, what you would actually see. I think like a standard mangle board would be about 2 to 3 feet long, and it would have a handle on it. But so this is something in the book that that you can do. And then there's this box that's in the chapter on compound chips, and this pattern is from actually stole the pattern from the Book of Kells. I don't know if you're familiar with the Book of Kells. It's a illuminated manuscript from I believe it's the 13th century in Ireland. So this is a little piggy bank that I made, and it opens on the bottom like that. I have these little I made a bunch of these small circular plaques with rosette designs on them, as well as examples that are in the book. Let's see, what else do I have here? Well, so these are samples that these might actually have been, I think these are in the book, but these were sort of work in progress examples. But I don't have any of my carved snowflake ornaments here, but I also I do chip carved snowflake ornaments for Christmas and holiday markets and stuff like that. So, but these small rosettes also work great as like little ornaments. So let's see, what else do I have here? I think that's about all I have with me today. The best way to get ideas for, you know, applications for chip carving is really to look at historical examples, because you know, pre-industrial people they decorated everything they had. So bed frames, blanket chests, stools, chairs, bowls, spoons, you name it. Cabinets, posts and beam frames of houses. You can find chip carved ornamentation on all of that kind of stuff in, especially in Europe, pre-industrial Europe, but in the United States too, because a lot of those folks migrated. If you go there's a lot of chip carving up in Pennsylvania that was, migrated over from Holland and Germany, and then of course in the Midwest, a lot of Scandinavian and German influence there. So there's a sort of a continuous line of chip carving from the old world into the United States. What other questions can I answer?
Have you ever heard of using your techniques to make cookie presses for like the German Springerles cookies?
I have seen that done. I haven't done it myself. But yeah, I've seen some of those cookie molds and butter molds and cheese molds, and I think there's a style of Italian pasta that uses sort of a hand carved mold as well. Yeah, people have done all sorts of stuff with chip and low relief carving. I also see used for that. What else we got?
We had another question in the chat. Can you talk a little bit about lettering? I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, but
yeah,
I know some people are interested in putting lettering on some of their carvings. So.
Right. So I don't have anything printed out, but I could just do a little freehand demo here. Let's see if I can grab a pencil real quick. Yeah. So one of the tricky things about lettering is, well, let's see, change this up. So I'm just gonna draw freehand a letter here. Just do an A, big A. All right, so I'll do like a Roman capital style A. This one's a little bit thinner than the other one. And then, so I'm just freehanding this, so it's a little sloppy, but do some serifs.
Dan, your head's in front of the.
Oh, sorry. That's one of the problems with this overhead camera rig. So. All right, so this is not a very good A. A little bit. Anyway, this is going to give you the idea. This is pretty quick and dirty. Put that right there. Okay. So one thing you have to watch out for in a lot of lettering, because lettering is typically lines, which in chip carving means V-shaped grooves, and they intersect. And because of the nature of wood grain, you're going to have these little points that are made of short grain. That means they're going to be weak. All right, so because you're carving all of these V grooves, when I carve this, the V grooves are all going to be made one cut at a time, so it means 2 cuts per V groove. And because my knife is angled, there's going to be a little bit of undercutting that happens. And so what I want to do is cut this out in a way that will not weaken that short grain point right there. And okay, so here's the other thing, is that I find personally these long pulling cuts that are going to be necessary for those, they're easier to do in first position. So I'm going to try to carve, well, they're more consistent in first position. Let's put it that way. So I'm going to do all of these cuts in first position. So I'm not going to be switching back and forth, or I'm going to be switching back and forth as little as I can. So how do I make these cuts? What order do I make these cuts in so that I do not weaken or damage that short grain point? And what I have found is that if you order your cuts so that, well, here, I'll just show you. I'm going to make this cut first on the inside. Excuse me. And I'm going to pretend like these serifs. Is everybody familiar with the term serif, right? It's these little tails on the ends of your pieces here. So I'm going to make this cut first. And I'm going to go all the way from this baseline past the point here and all the way across this leg of the A. Now I'm going to turn that upside down, or just right side up rather. And I'm going to make this cut right here, all the way down to the baseline. Okay, so the reason I made those cuts in that order is that, go back upside down here, by making this cut first, that means that my second cut around that little short grain point is not pulling the fibers apart, right? So imagine if I had made those in the opposite order. If I did this one first, and then I did this one, the knife is wedge shaped, and no matter how polished it is, it's gonna drag. It's gonna create some drag, a little bit of drag. And this little point is short grain, right? So there's just those little fibers, there's not very many of them holding that point together. And I would risk damaging that point if I had made this cut second. So I have a better chance of keeping that point nice and crisp by making those cuts in the order that I did. So I'll just go on to do the rest of it here. Come down here. And you'll see I've got some waste. Let me zoom in a little bit. Got some waste in the bottom of that groove I'll come back for. And you'll see that when my chip doesn't pop out, I'm turning the board around and around and remaking those cuts until they line up. And then even once the majority of the waste pops out, I'm gonna clean up those facets just by making my cuts again. Try not to recut outside the line. So this is a place where, well, no, I can do that in first position too. Just carve in my serifs here. I am going to go in second position here for a second. Sorry, hard keeping it on camera here. So aside from the order of operations, the lettering is just a matter of breaking things down into shapes that you can carve with, individual passes, individual cuts. Sometimes it's a little stubborn. Get the little bits of waste out of there. And this last little bit right here. So that's pretty quick and dirty, just from a freehand sketch of an A, but you get the general idea. So all of that, that's the what I said about ordering your cuts, that's going to change if the orientation of your letter to the grain changes, right? So it would be a different ball game if I were carving an A that was oriented to the grain, vertically like that. I'm not going to have to worry as much about that point, because that point is, a point in an A oriented like this isn't made up of short grain. So lettering is a good exercise in following grain direction, and there's a lot of places to make mistakes. You can screw things up real quick if you're not careful. So you want to keep your knife sharp and pay close attention to the direction of the grain, and try to think ahead in terms of what each cut you're making is going to do to the strength of these of places where the grain is relatively unsupported, like this little point that sticks out, there in the center of the A. So.
All right, Daniel, we're about 20 after the hour.
Okay.
So we're coming up on time. Does anybody else in the group have any questions for Daniel at this point? Okay. Just want to say thank you, Daniel, for coming on today and sharing with us. Thanks for showing us your techniques, and look forward to digging into that book. And again, if you all want one of the books, make sure you reach out to Daniel and get that. And again, he has the kits and stuff available. I'll put all the links down in the YouTube video when we post it out there later tonight or tomorrow, so that you can find ways to get a hold of Daniel and get access to the information. Before we go, I just want to talk a little bit about the workshops that are coming up. You make sure you go out and check out Woodcarving Academy. Past workshops have been recorded and they're out there on Woodcarving Academy. So make sure you're taking advantage of that. I want to remind you that Janet Cordell is going to have a class coming up on September the 30th on carving the female face in cottonwood bark. Make sure you reach out to Janet if you're interested in that. Dave Stetson, again, who's on here now, has a class coming up on October the 1st. It's his bookworm seated reader guide that he was showing us before the meeting started. If you're interested in that class, make sure you reach out to Dave. On October the 8th, Kevin Applegate's going to have a class carving the Bride of Frankenstein. I think that's a 2-day class. So make sure you reach out to Kevin. On November the 5th, again, Dave Stetson's going to be doing his yearly Santa project. So if you're interested in that, he'll probably start taking students immediately following the seated reader bookworm class. So make sure if you're interested in that, contact Dave and he'll give you the information that you need as far as signing up for that class. And then again, Bob Hershey's on with us today. On December the 3rd, Bob's going to be having a class on the raccoon Santa that he was talking to us. And he's actually holding it up there. If anybody can see Bob, his raccoon Santa project will start on December the 3rd. And again, Bob's coming on with us on October the 22nd. And he's going to be doing some cottonwood bark work. So make sure you join us there. Again, Daniel, thanks for coming on today. Thanks for sharing with us. Again, we'll put all this information out on YouTube, so it'll be out there available. If anybody missed the meeting, they can go out and watch it. And again, we'll put all the links so people know how to get a hold of you. And I just want to say thank you all for joining us today with the International Association of Woodcarvers. Make sure you join in next week, Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Jack Loring of Cousin Jack Carves will be on with us, so we'll see you all next Saturday. Thank you all.